Morning, gentlemen. Today, our agenda is a little bit different than normal in the sense that we've covered the iyun, a lot of essay dochalosas that's going to come up again. And there's a kind of transition period between Daf Dalid and Hey. Daf Hey is already back on track. So I don't want to skip. I want to go through Dalid, especially Dalid on the Bays. And we'll start today on Dalid on Aleph, review what we've done, and then move on. And say bon voyage to Steve here. Steve, you want to say goodbye?
I'll see you in a few weeks.
Yeah, Steve has a flight tonight or tomorrow, technically. At a very early hour. So, Seiskan L'Sholem and Boachim. So we're going to start on Daf Daled Amud Aleph, on pretty much on the top of the Omud. This will be a chazor for us. Amar Rav Sheshes. That's 4 lines down from the top of the Omud. Mishum Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. And the subject of today's discussion, today's learning, is smichus, what we can derive from smuchim. Minayim liyavama shenafla lifnei mukashchin she'ein chosmin osa. If she comes forward in front of Bezdin and she says, I'm not a candidate, I'm not interested at all in Yibum, I want chalitza, I want out of this zikas Yibum because the Yavam is a mukashchin. How do we know that we don't muzzle her? Meaning we don't quiet down her claims. We accept her claim, and we can actually force the Yavam to implement a chalitza. Shenemar, and here we derive from smuchim, lo sachsam shar bedisho, v'samachle ki yeshru achim yachdav. And what's happening here is that the first pasuk is limiting the second. In the previous smichus, where we had a limitation in the Isa Shatnes, it was the second pasuk that revealed something and limited the first pasuk. So the lo sachso, so the lo silbash is limited by gedilim tasalacha. In the case of tzitzis, here it goes the reverse order. And the first pasuk, which is lo sachsom, is limiting the second pasuk of the mitzvah of Yibum. But the bottom line is, in both cases, we have smichus and we are dorish smuchim. According to this Gemara, smuchim does not necessarily apply throughout the Torah, because if you notice, both of the cases of darshin on smuchim that we have so far come from Sefer Dvarim, from Mishnah Torah. The Omer of Yosef, afilu man lo darish smuchim bi'alma, according to Rabbi Yehuda, which we can identify as that Tana who rejects the possibility and the methodology of darish smuchim in general, but with Mishnah Torah, darish, he agrees that there is a license to darshan and derive halachas from smuchim in Mishnah Torah. And the drashas that we've had so far, both from Kilayim B'tzitzis and from Yevam in the case of Mukashchin, are both in Mishnah Torah. So at this point, we all systems clear. We have a unanimous double, 2 different drushos, 2 different halachas that we derive from smuchim in Sefer Mishnah Torah. Daha, Rav Yosef wants to prove that Rabbi Yehuda, who bi'alma lo dorish, he does not accept the drush of smuchim, but Mishnah Torah dorish. And now the Gemara is going to go through a 2-stage process in sort of archiving or investigating the Shita of Rabbi Yehuda vis-a-vis smuchim. Number 1, what does Rabbi Yehuda do bi alma, meaning in the rest of the Torah, the first four books of the Torah, where do we see that Rabbi Yehuda rejects smuchin? And secondly, where do we find that Rabbi Yehuda concedes that with regard to Mishnah Torah, we will accept smuchin? So we go through this two-stage process, bi alma minon to lo dorish, tisanya, and now we're talking about the nature of the chiyuv misa in the capital crime of machashefa. What is the exact chiyuv misa? And in this brisa, we're going to see that Ben Azai from Smuchin derives the conclusion that the punishment meted out to a machshefa is skila, and Rabbi Yehuda rejecting Smuchin, because that case of Smuchin is from Sefer Shmos, he's going to find a different source to derive the conclusion that a machshefa gets skila. So let's go through the brisa. The Sanya Ben Azai Omer, he's going to darshan Smuchin. Nemar, the pasuk says machshefa lo sechaya, but the Torah doesn't tell us in which particular method of capital punishment we implement with regard to a machshefa. But in the next pasuk, it says kol shochev behema mos yumos. Now, if we can determine what exactly is the misa in the case of shochev behema, then through Smuchin, says Ben Azai, we can shed a light on which particular misa should be meted out to a machshefa, namely skila, like in the case of shochev behema. Smacho inyan lo, the Torah was somech the parsha of machshefa to the parsha of shochev in behema, and ma shochev behema beskila, af machashefa beskila. And here Rashi addresses the question as to how do we know that shochev behema is misaso beskila. And Rashi insists that we're going to derive this from the case of a revia to an isha. If a woman has this act of bestiality, and that's already stretching our arm out to a different part of the Torah, to Vayikra Perek Chav, Visha Asher Tikrav El Kol Behema L'Rova Osav Araita Sa Isha V'Sveim Mos Yumas Tmeim Bam. So we have to emphasize the last two words in the pasuk Tmeim Bam, and we're going to determine that the words Tmeim Bam refer to skila, and then once we know that Tmeim Bam refers to skila, therefore a woman who has a revia with a behema gets skila, then we're going to assume that a man who has a relationship with an animal, that's called shochev behema, he also gets skila. And once we determine that a man who's shochev behema gets skila, then we can determine that a machshefa gets skila by virtue of the smichus haparshas. So we have a law of transmutation. We have A, B, and C, and we're going to have to add another element into the equation, right? So we have here the case of an isha with the behema, and the Torah says utmei bam, and that refers to skila, as we're going to derive in a moment. And that's the Sugim Sanhedrin. And from isha we go to the shochev, and from the shochev we go back to the machshefa. So that's A equals B. Now, how do we know that Tmeim Bam, in the case of an isha who has a relationship with an animal, is a reference to skila? That's Gemara Sanhedrin. And the Gemara finds that in the parsha of Ovi Doni, and that's also Vayikra Chav, it says, V'even yirgamu osam Tmeim Bam. That in the cases of Ovi Doni, the Torah says we put him to death with V'even yirgamu with skila. And it says Tmeim Bam. The addition of those two words, Tmeim Bam, are meant to tell us that whenever you see these words Tmeim Bam, you should identify them as skila. So therefore, in the case of Revia of an Isha with a Behema, where the Torah says Mos Yumsu Tmeim Bam, that refers to skila. And now Rashi says, once we know that in the case of an Isha with the Behema, she gets skila, so too in the case of an Ish with the Behema, he gets skila. And now we're ready for the smichus and the drasha of Ben Azai, that if we determine based on shochev in a case of an isha or revere. Therefore, shochev maybe gets skila. Therefore, we can determine that a machshefa gets skila. Now, how do we know that Rabbi Yehuda rejects the drasha of Smuchin, of Ben Azai? Omalo Rabbi Yehuda says to Ben Azai, V'chi mipnei shesmacho inyan lo, notzi zel skila. Can we be machayev a machashev skila based on smichos? Skila, after all, is the most chamor, the most severe of all four mises bezdin. And you're making a real jump here to implement the most severe of, and derive and establish the most severe of all mises bezdin in the case of a chashev, based on smichos aparshios. That we cannot do. Ella, and therefore Rabbi Yehuda offers a substitute derivation to determine what is the misa of a machashev, and that we're going to derive from ovidoni, because the Torah specifies in Vayikra Chav that ovidoni is tveim bam, but even yirgamu osam tveim bam, they get skila, and that's bichlal machashefim hayu. We know that ovidoni are two specific cases of the general category of mechashvim. The lama yatsu, why did the Torah have to tell me specifically in the cases of ovidoni in their own parsha that they have to be put to death when we know already that a machashefa gets put to death? So why do I need the Torah to spell out ovidoni? It's just another case in point of machashev. And the answer is because the Torah in ovidoni says by Evan Yigbu also to be machadesh, that the specific misa that we're going to single out for the case of ovidoni is skila by Evan Yigbu also. And now, since ovidoni are specific cases within the general rubric, the general category of machashev, therefore the machashev, like the ovidoni, is going to get skila, and that's called lahakish lahem. We're going to be makish all the categories of machashev to these two cases of ovidoni. V'lo malacha ma ovidoni b'skila, af machashefa b'skila. And this is how Rabbi Yehuda derives the conclusion that a machashefa is b'skila. He's not going to derive from the smuchim, because Rabbi Yehuda does not darshan smuchin, at least in the rest of the Torah. We'll see in a minute about the Torah. He cannot therefore accept the drasha of Ben Azai, on the basis of which we establish that a machashev gets skila. He has to find an alternative to that smuchin because he doesn't darshan smuchin. And he finds the alternative in the hekesh between ovi, doni, and a machashev. So that's, shall we say, Roman numeral number one in investigating the Shita Rabbi Yehuda to establish that Rabbi Yehuda rejects smuchin in the rest of the Torah, in the Torah. Now, if you look at Rashi, which we already summarized, let's see it inside. It's about 10 lines down from the top of the page. Masechet Yevamot skila, tichsiv be'isha nirvas behema, tmeim bam, v'chol tmeim bam b'skilahi. The Gamrina me ovi doni the simple yirgamu osam dmeim bam. So that's the Rashi that we spoke out before. And here I have to show you a few lines in Tosas which baffle my mind. Maybe you can tell me what he's talking about. Look at Tosas, Dibar Mastil V'chi, which is about 5 lines down in the wide lines. 6 lines. In Tomar, Tosas says, let's play hard to get. You know, how do you know that Rabbi Yehuda rejects smuchin? Dilma hachahu delodar smuchin. Maybe here in the question of machashev, whether he's chayav skila or not, here in this context, Rabbi Yehuda rejects smuchin. Mishum gzeres shava, The Dorish Rabbi Yossi Agli Beperek Al Bisos, Sanhedrin Samat Zayin, the Mafka Mismuchim, the Dorish Milosechaya. I'll get back to those two words, the Mafka Mismuchim in a minute. Those are very important words. But he says the Dorish Milosechaya called Neshama, the Besayif. There's a Gzeira Shava, according to Rabbi Yossi Aglili, between the mitzvah of destroying the 7 nations that occupy the land and the Machashev. And that Gzeira Shava teaches me that just like Lo Sechai Kol Neshama is B'Sayif, right? We go out to battle against these nations and we destroy them with the sword, so too the Misa for Machashev is Sayif, with a sword. And if that be the case, maybe the reason why, now we get back to those 2 words that I skipped, why Rabbi Yehuda rejects an Azai and the equation, right, the connection to Shochem and Behema is because he has this Gzeira Shava, which teaches me the opposite conclusion, that the Chiyuv Bisa in the case of a Machashev is like Lo Sechaya called the Shama. The Gzeira Shama is going to teach me it is Sayif and not Skilu. And I'll tell you what baffles me. I must be missing something basically. Amalo, in our Gemara it says, Amalo Rabbi Yehuda, V'chinei says, Samchu Inyan Lo Notzi Zel Skila, Ella Ovi Doni, etc. I mean, Rabbi Yehuda explicitly on record is saying that we derive skill in the case of Machashev from the, Klalu Prat, or call it a Hekesh, between Ovi, Dodi, and all other Machashev. And now Tosfos is saying maybe Rabbi Yehuda holds like the Gzeira Shava of Rabbi Yossi, which would lead me to the conclusion that Machashev is put to death with Sayif. And I don't see how Tosfos can even raise such a possibility.
You're saying that you have the one that's skila, you have another way that's Tayek. Either one of those is where it comes from. That's where it comes from.
Well, Tosfos says those 2 words that Gzeira Shava Adifa, meaning that if you have a conflict between 2 methods of deriving halachas, one is called smuchin and the other is called Gzeira Shava trumps smuchin.
Right.
And therefore, maybe Rabbi Yehuda holds that the Misa for a Machashev is Sayif, based on the Gzeira Shava of Yosei Aglili, and not Skilu. So you're saying that maybe, I mean, I'm not sure why does Tosfos feel we have to go beyond the simple reading of the text? I mean, Amala Rabbi Yehuda says, I'm not going to accept Smuchin. I have a different drasha. The fact that he came to the same conclusion, namely that Machashev is Beskila, that doesn't bother me. He's just rejecting your Ben Azai. I don't accept your method. I can come to the same identical conclusion in a different method. What is Tosfos gaining here by introducing Rabbi Yossi Aglili's Gzeira Shava? I mean, to my mind, that just confuses. I have here, in the back of the Masechet, they have something called Biurei Tosfos. I looked it up, and I don't understand. He doesn't blink about it. He says the following. He says, "Minay lecha lo masher Yehuda eno darish smuchin dilma hacha gabi machashefa dafka udelo darish smuchin. They lilmod shehi beskila, that a machashefa gets skila. Mishum dilagabe ha." No, it's with regard to the question of what bisa we should meet out to machashefa. Ika gzeret shava the darish from Yosei Perek Al Bisos the mafka. The osek Gzeira Shava motzia umelamedes lahepo me'adracha shel asmuchim. The chazin and osam the dorich of Rabbi Yossi Aglili Gzeira Shava machshefa lo sechai mi lo sechai kol neshama. Interesting. We didn't have that, so that's helpful. That in the parsha of Machashefa it says lo sechai, those 2 words, and in the parsha of destroying the 7 nations it says lo sechai kol neshama. We have the same exact 2 words. The Asik Gzeira Shava Lalamed, the Af Machashefa Misasa he was Sayif, Kamod Zayin Am. The Imkain, this is the punchline. The Imkain, Yitochen shegam Rabbi Yehuda moder debekol Torah kula darshinon smuchin, but lebar mihach, with the exception of machashefa. Here we're not going to allow ourselves the license of smuchin, right? The smuch is to shochem and behema. Debekol Torah kula darshinon smuchin. But Labar Mihach, they came in the Ika Be Yalfusa B'Yuchedes, the Machshefa Dina B'Sayev, in Zion Alamim, the Lobeskila, in a Lamelach Yalfusa B'Smu. I don't get it. Well, what about our price? The price says explicitly Rabbi Yehuda derives Skila in Machshefa from a Hekesh to Ovidoni. Nobody seems to blink about this, Tosis.
Is stronger than Shava.
I think so.
So he said.
Oh, I don't know. Oh, no. You're asking which is stronger, Hekesh or Shava. That I don't know. But be that as it may, Rabbi Yehuda says explicitly, Ella, forget about Smichus, Ella, how do you know that Nisas Machshefa is Biskila? Ovidoni Bechlal, Loma Yatsu, Lahakish, Lomar, Ma, Ovidoni Biskila, Afkol Machshefa Biskila. So why are you chepping me with Rabbi Yosef Glili? Yeah, so I guess Rabbi Yehuda didn't have that Kabbalah. I know Tosa saying maybe he had that Kabbalah. It's possible, but why? I don't get it. Why look a gift horse in the mouth? I mean, it says, I don't understand. I'm missing some piece of the puzzle here, but I don't know what that is.
What's saying is it you reject that smoking because of the Shava, but then he overrides that with his Hekesh.
Maybe. But again, why does Tosus have to do this for me? Lama is the Sabechet Tanya. Why do you get complicated? It's the simple pshat of it. And by the way, at the end of the day, Tosus says the only reason we derive from this price of this dusiach between Ben Azai and Rabbi Yehuda rejects Smuchin is only because of his language. And Tosus Medayik in that language that he rejects Smuchin. I mean, I would say he rejects Smuchin because he is not willing to rely on the derivation of Ben Azai. Instead, he substitutes his derivation of the Hekesh between Ovidoni and all. So again, so I'm asking for some empathy at this point. Truth is that there's more to this Tosus. So maybe if I went, I dropped it at this point because Tosus, he's quoting with Rabbi Akiva with Sugyas, and you have to know this and that. That's all. Let's go on. The Mishnah Torah Minolan did Darish, meaning how do we know that even Rabbi Yehuda Darshan Smuchin and Mishnah Torah? Now, at this point, I don't understand. Oh, maybe I was going to ask a question, but I think I answered it in my mind. I was going to ask you, why does Gemara have to address this question? We had already two drushes of Smuchin. We don't know that Rabbi Yehuda disagrees with them. And both of them came from Mishnah Torah. One is Tzitzis B'Kalayim, and the other was Yevam in the case of Mukashchin. Well, the only answer I can give to that is that the Gemara is looking for a case where Rabbi Yehuda explicitly voiced his opinion, confirming a Smuchin in Mishnah Torah, because one could always counter argue that maybe Rabbi Yehuda rejected the other drushes of Smuchin. The Snan. Now we have a Mishnah. Let's see where this Mishnah is from. A little, what is it, a Zion here?
Yeah.
Where is that Zion in the Masorah Shas? Oh, it seems like it's in two Gemaras. It's in Brachos and later on. Probably it's a Mishnah in Brachos. That's my That's my guess. Anyway, Zan. So now we're going to have a whole debate about the following. We know that Ashes Aviv is an Ereva, as the Torah says in Vayikra Yud Ches, I think is Achrimos, if I'm not mistaken. Anyway, it says Ervas Ashes Avicha Lo Segal. So that's only Ashes Avicha. This woman was married to your father. What's the deal in a case where your father had an extramarital relationship with a woman? Are you, as the son of your father, enjoined from having a relationship with that woman? That's going to be a major machlokas. And now we learn the shita of the Tanakama. No say adam anusas aviv futas aviv. A man can marry his father's anusa or mafuta. Why? Because since the Torah says ervas eshes avicha, eshes means ishus. She was married to your father. This woman was not married to your father. And therefore, you're allowed to marry her. Now we have a flip side. What happens if the father wants to marry not the wife of his son, but the anusa or mafuta of his son? And the Chachamim here, Tanakama, is very consistent. And anusa spino, mafuta spino. Likewise, the father could marry the anusa or the mafuta of his son because it was never kedushin. And the Torah says ervas kaloscha lo segal. Kaloscha means that she was married to your son. But these cases of anusa mafuta, there was no marriage. Rabbi Yehuda Otzer ba'anusas aviv umefutas aviv. How could that be? The Torah says ervas eshes avicha. This is not eshes avicha. So for that, to shed a light on Rabbi Yehuda, we need to hear the insights of Rav Gidol Amar Rab. My time of the Rabbi Yehuda, even though Anusas Aviv is not included in Ashes Aviv, but the Chsiv, lo yikach ish es Ashes Aviv, v'lo yigaleh knaf Aviv. The Torah adds an extra 4 words in Parshas Kisei. Now keep in mind, this is a repetition of what we have in Vayikra, with the exception of the addition of these 4 words, if you follow what I mean. In other words, the Torah, which it very often does, in which the Torah repeats an Isa that's already been codified and formulated in one of the previous 4 Chumashim, and that's what the Torah is doing here. In Dvarim Perikov Gimel, it's repeating the Isa of H's of that we already had in Vayikra Yud Ches, but it adds another element into the equation to expand the application of this prohibition of this erva with the words V'lo yigala knaf oviv. What is lo yigala knaf oviv? Knaf shara oviv. And knaf is somehow a metaphor for an intimacy, and knaf shara oviv, meaning the woman who had this intimate relationship with your father, lo yigal. You're not allowed to have a relationship with her, even though they never had a marriage relationship. It's only knaf shara oviv. Now, the impression I get here, I don't know if I'm right, is that Rabbi Yehuda does not disagree with the Chachamim, with the Tanakama, as far as Anusas Beno, Misfutas Beno. He only disagrees with Anusas Aviv because the Torah gives us almost a separate lav with regard to Anusas Aviv by saying V'lo Yigala Knaf Aviv. Now, Rabbosai, is that called smichus? No, there's no smichus here. So we're in the middle of a long presentation here. You know, that's very typical of Talmud Babel. You know, we have to take a breath and a pause. Now the Gemara asks a side question here on Rabbi Yehuda. I mean, how does Rabbi Yehuda know the Knaf Aviv is Banusa Ksiv? And here's where we're going to get smuch. In other words, again, the conclusion of Rabbi Yehuda that a son is not allowed to marry Anusas Aviv is a combo of A plus B. B, the Makav Patishir, is going to be the 4 words of Lo Yigala Knaf Aviv. But how did Rabbi Yehuda convince himself that Lo Yigala Knaf Aviv refers to Anusas Aviv? For that he needed smichus. So smichus is only, in a sense, a middle piece of a connecting puzzle. Me'ilave dekra. Ilave means that which came first. The aliyah, the mila. The chsiv. Now again, our derivation, I mean Rabbi Yehuda's derivation of Lo Yigal Knaf Aviv is in Dvarim Perek Chav Gimel. We're now going back to the end of Perek Chav Beis, and we're going to dash in Smuchin. The chsiv. Now, the last parsha in Perek Chav Beis of Dvarim is the parsha of Ones Umefata. And that's the Knas of Chamishim Kesef. And the Pasuk says, V'nasan ha'isha shochev imo la'avi anara chamishim kosef. And that's a reference to an anusa. He raped this woman, the Nara, and now he has to pay Chamishim Kesef to her father as a penalty. This Samachle, and immediately afterwards, the beginning of the next chapter of Gimel, it says Lo Yikach Ish, and then it says Lo Yigal Knaf Aviv. So from the smichus between the parsha of Anusa and the parsha of Gilui Knaf Aviv, we derive that Gilui Knaf Aviv is a reference to an Anusa, just like the previous parsha discusses the case of Anusa. So we see clearly that even Rabbi Yehuda, who rejected smuchin in the case of the machshefa to determine that her misa is beskila, but nevertheless he accepts smuchin in this context, and that's explicit. And he's going to derive from smuchin that lo yigala knaf aviv is a reference to anusa, and therefore a son is enjoined from having a relationship with his father's anusa. And how is that different than the other smuchin that Rabbi Yehuda rejected in the case of machshefa? The answer is that machshefa is in Kol HaTarkula, and this drasha of Lo Yigala Knaf Aviv is a smuchin in Mishnah Torah. Now, the Tanakama of the Mishnah that we quoted earlier maintained that there's no Iser for a son to have a relationship with Anusas Aviv. So for Rabbanan, how are they going to deal with this pasuk of Lo Yigala Knaf Aviv, which according to the Smichus, to Anusa is a reference to Anusas Aviv. Now, for me, not for Mitch, but for me, at this point, I have to open a chumash. There's no way I can read the next Gemara without a chumash. I think, no, we once had a chumash. Yeah. I mean, this for you, Mitch, is a cinch, but no. I need to see this inside. Well, the Gemara is going to try to prove that Rabbana rejects smichus because there's one pasuk that separates the two. Well, thank you. So the Gemara says, Rabbanon, why do they reject this Lo Yigala Knaf Aviv? I mean, the Rabbanon accepts smichus in Chara Torah, how much more so in Mishnah Torah? He says, If the parsha of Anusa samech le, in other words, we have a pasuk lo yigala knaf aviv in. Let me just open this up in Perikaf Gimel. Of Sefer Dvarim. You get used to singing Chumash like in a certain. This is embarrassing. Oh, that's it. I didn't, because 2 pages got stuck. He says at the beginning of Perikov Gimel, Lo Yigala Ishas Eishas Aviv, Lo Yigala Knaf Aviv. So that's Pasuk Aleph in Perikov Gimel. Now we go back to the last Pasuk in Perikov Beis. V'nasana Isha Shaltei Bimol Avia Narach Hamishim Kasef below Sieli Isha Achas Asher Ina Lo Yukach L'Shalcha Kol Yom Hashted Lo Samachle. And why is that? Diksiv Lo Yikach Ishas Eishas Aviv Ben Tayim. Oh, I see what he's saying. Truth is, I could have figured this out without the Chumash, because what the Chachamim are doing here against Rabbi Yehuda, they're taking this one pasuk at the beginning of Chav Gimel about Eishas Aviv, and they're splitting it from the Reisha to the Sefer. The Reisha says Lo Yikach Eishas Aviv, and the Sefer says Lo Yigala Knafav. Now, you want to set up a smichus that Lo Yigala Knafav is contiguous to the end of the previous perek, namely to Ma'anis, who pays the Avia Nara Chamishim Kasef. But the only problem is that in between, wedged in between, you have the Reisha of that pasuk, Chav Gimel pasuk Aleph, Lo Yikach Ish Es Eishes Aviv. So that's a hefsek to interrupt the contiguity of the parsha of Ones with the parsha of the Isa Gilui Knaf Aviv. Therefore, the Chachamim say we don't have the ability to darshan smuchin here in this case, and derive the conclusion that a man is prohibited in anusas aviv. But now we have to ask a different question. So what did the Chacham do with the possible Yigala Knaf Aviv? Bishlem, according to Rabbi Yehuda, Lo Yigala Knaf Aviv means anusas aviv, and we apply the principle of smuchim. And that sets up a whole new extension of the law of Lo Yikach Eishes Aviv that applies even to a case of anusas aviv. But according to Chachamim, since the beginning of this pasuk Lo Yikach is a wedge, a hefsek, which cuts off the ability to apply the principle of smuchin, so we don't know that Lo Yigala Knaf Aviv is referring to an anusa. What is it referring to? What is the Torah telling me in the Sefer in this pasuk Lo Yigala Knaf Aviv? The more answers, B'shomeres Yavam HaKosu Midaber. All right, so for this I have a diagram here, but I don't even think I need the diagram. It's pretty simple. What happens is that his father had a brother, and that's his uncle. And his uncle died without children and left a wife for Yibum. So that's called Eshes Achi Aviv Shemes B'lo Banim. Achi Aviv. Now, when Achi Aviv dies without any children, his widow falls to Yibum to his father. Now, she, the almana of, we'll call him Reuven, the uncle, she becomes a Shomeres Yavam to Shimon. And the son of Shimon could never have a relationship with that woman once she was a Shomeres Yavam of the father. Now, what I'm trying to figure out is what exactly happened with this Yevamot. What exactly happens? Just 1 second. Harehi mamtenes umetzapa sheyivmena aviv ba'kasel yoshal ben. That's lo yigala knaf aviv. Then he writes the following: the af shegam ilu hoisa nofeles liyibum lifnei acherim. Hoisa asura all of the lav. Teres dakli b'mal. Torah. Nosaf al ben hayov. Gemara says Lavral Shnei Lav. What's happening here is that she's a Shomeres Yavam, right? She's the wife. I don't remember the names we gave, but let's give the following names. You have Reuven and Shimon are brothers, and Reuven has a son by the name of Chanoch. Let's say. Now Shimon marries, we'll call her Leah. Okay, Shimon marries Leah. And Shimon again is Achi Aviv of Chanoch. Shimon dies without children, and his wife Leah falls for Yibum to Reuven, Chanoch's father. That's called the Shomeres Yavam. At this point, if Chanoch would have a relationship with Leah, he would violate the law of Lo Yigala Knaf Aviv, because she's Kuka with a Zikas Yibum to Reuven, his father. Now, the Gemara points out that, forget it, let's say she was a Shomeres Yavam and Shimon was not in any way related to Chanoch, and Chanoch would have a relationship with this Leah. He would still violate the Isur of Losia Ish Samei Sachutz Mitzar, the Isur of Shomeres Yavam. Shomeres Yavam is an Isur Lav on the whole world, even, right, it has nothing to do with relatives. But in this case, because she's a Shomeres Yavam to Reuven's father, to Chanoch's father Reuven, we're going to double up. And if an event, Chas v'shalom, Chanoch would have a relationship with Leah, the former, right, the widow of Shimon, who's the Shomeres Yavam of his father Reuven, he would violate two lavim. the lav of losia eishes hameis achutza lishsar, which is the lav that always applies to a skuka of medicine, and he would violate the lav of lo yigala knaf of. Let me think about you. Yeah. So that's the Gemara later on. You were machamin to a sugya daf tzadi zayin. 97. We're on 4. And I only know this from the footnote, because I'm only on 4 as well. But he says, Lahalam b'daf tzadi zayin mosifa Gemara shu over gamal lav shlishi kakosuv eras achi avicha lo sigala el ishto lo sikrav dodos pahi. Aresho beres yom zu eshes achi avithi. So he violates not 2 lav, but 3 lav. Okay, so this ends Roman numeral number 1 and Roman numeral number 2, meaning Rabbi Yehuda rejected smichus in the case of machashefa, and that represents Shara Torah. He accepted smuchin in the case of lo segala eshes aviv, referring to anusis aviv in the case of a smuchin from Mishnah Torah. And now the Gemara asks what I would call from my youth the $64,000 question. But with Mishnah Torah, my time in Dorish. And as if Rabbi Yehuda rejects smuchin, why does he concede that in the case of Mishnah Torah you do darshan? And the Gemara offers 2 answers. The first answer is Ibais Ema Mishum de Mochach. And the second answer is Ibais Ema Mishum Mufnin. So the Gemara now analyzes these 2 answers. Ibais Ema Mishum de Mochach. He conjugates it as Mochach with a cholom after the mem. The Imkain Lichteve Rachmana Gabi Arayos. Mochach means that there's something in the pasuk itself that begs us to darshan. And what is that something that begs us to darshan? When a pasuk appears out of its parsha, out of water, it's not in its place. And when the Torah says lo yigal knaf aviv, then that should have been written in the parsha achremos of the Isurei Arayos. Why does it appear here in Parshas Ki Teitzah? So that's called Demochach. Now, if I understand correctly, the Gemara is now arguing that when does Rabbi Yehuda accept smuchin? Number 1, it's got to be in Mishnah Torah, but number 2, it also has to be Demochach. Meaning you have to prove to me that the pasuk that from which you want to derive smuchin in Mishnah Torah is out of place. Ibais Ema Mishum de Mufni. Wait, let me just go over the last point. The Muchach, if Rabbi Yehuda's analysis is that the pasuk lo yigala knaf aviv is coming up l'chora with some new Isur lav, which according to Chacham is Shomer Siyam. But whatever it is, it should be in the parsha of the Isur Arayos. It shouldn't be here. And that gives us license to darshan smuch in Mishnah Torah. Ibai say mishum de mufti. What does it mean, the mufti? It's completely superfluous. The imkain, if we're not going to use lo yigal knaf aviv as a smichus to the parsha of Ones, is lift of Rahmana lo yikach ishes aviv So this is called mufti, because all the Torah had to tell me in order to teach me, I'm sorry, if the Torah is not teaching me anusa, then the Torah should have just been happy. It should have been sufficient to say, quote, lo yikach ishas eishes aviv. But lo yigal knaf of is completely redundant. No, that's called mufti. Yishma mino, the top two words here on Dalet Omid Beis, li afnuye, that there's a yitur kra over here that allows me to darshan smuchah. And we go back to the previous pasuk or the previous parsha, which is anusa. And we're going to therefore interpret that knaf aviv is referring to anusas aviv, but not to shomeres yavam the way that the chachamim interpreted it. Now, if I understand correctly, the Gemara is saying that Rabbi Yehuda gives license for smuchin and confirms smuchin if one of two scenarios, one or two possibilities, either mochach or muf. That's the way I understand. There's a wealth of literature here on this. I don't even know where to begin. It's like scary. But if you happen to have pages Chaf Dalet and Chaf Hey, the Chaf Hey got a little bit erased here on top left. Basically, all of this that you're looking at on these two pages are all an analysis of what we learned today. I went through lots of this, and I find it very technical. Let me just sort of look at just a superficial reading of what the topics are. I mean, for example, on Chaf Dalet on the left column, he has on the bottom a section called Makar Din Skila B'Shochev Im Behema, which we started yesterday. And he has a catch-up from the Achronim. And it seems that this jump of Rashi from the case of an Isha HaNirvas, where the Torah says explicitly man bum, and therefore it means that she gets skila, and Rashi jumps over to the Ish HaShochev and assumes that he likewise will get skila. But even though in this pasuk it doesn't say man bum, so that comes under fire. Because the Gemara says in Sanhedrin and Daled that Ish HaShochev Im Behema Onsho B'Skila Nilma B'Gzera Shava V'Taharogu Taharogu Omer B'Mesis. So in Mesis it says Skila, and there's a Gzera Shava between Mesis and Shochem and Behema, and therefore Shochem and Behema gets skila. The Gemara is not willing to derive it from Isha Nirvas, where it says Dmei and Bam, which means skila. So if you look on the top of page Chaf Hey, he begins with the Cheshek Shlomo, goes on to Yaref Laner, and then finally Rashash. This is all very, very technical. I'll tell you what I got at the Cheshek Shlomo is going to argue that based on the Torah's Kohanim, the Girsa is Hashochev, Ish Hashochev Behema, Nemer Kana Riga, Nemer Kana Lahalan Riga. So he's saying that Gzeir Shav is not to the Isha, but to the Ish. The Aruch LaNer, on the other hand, wants to say that we need both. We need the pasuk by Isha, and we need the Gzeir Shav, which again is very complicated, very technical. And the Rashash wants to know whether there's a difference between the Shochem and the Nishkav. I don't know. Also, you have to know more about the bestiality here. The next piece is even more technical. I mean, I tried to work this out. There's a Tosfos garnish, not garnished, as we say in Yiddish, but garnish. But I couldn't figure this out. So if anyone is interested, I invite you. I would rather go on to more exciting. Now on the left column on Chaf Hey, he has a section called Smichus lo yikach lo yovo mamzer. And then he has a section called Bira Machlokes Bein Shnei Tirutze HaGemara Lehalon. So in our Gemara, for example, it says Lavar Olav B'Shnei Lavin, and in the Gemara in Tzadi Zayin, the Gemara asks what Shomer Yevamot Shel Aviv is included in the general Isa that applies to everyone called Yevamot L'Shuk, and the Gemara answers Shel Rabbi Yehuda over Olav Aleha B'Shlosha Lavin. Naf Aviv, Dodaso, V'Yevamot L'Shuk. Then the Gemara gives another teretz that after Bisas Aviv, that's when the Torah is establishing Lo Yigala Knaf Aviv and Isur Shomeres Yom. So right now there is no other Isur Yevamot L'Shuk. So he quotes Rab Nachman, Madua Lo Tirtza Gemara, Shakosu Medaber Li'achar Shecholza Li'aviv. Yeah, but I think to me that Chalutzas Aviv is a separate. All right, I don't know. I don't know enough about Chalutzas Aviv. Anyway, V'chein Sorach Bir Madua Miyain Hatosis Arishon Hatosis Arishon Lamedes Hakosu Li'achar Misas Aviv. Pasul Lefar Shali Achar Chalitza Ein Ba Isa Shomeres Yom Shel Aviv Ki L'Kuliyama Chalitza Mafkiyas Azika Shuvein Izkuka Li'aviv Ach Nechleku Shnei HaTerutzim Ha'im Li'achar Misas Aviv Adayin Hi Asur Mishum Shomeres Yom Shel Aviv. So in general, we would say that there's no Iser at all of Shomer Yavam after the Misas Aviv, but in the case of Ben, there we're going to establish that the Iser of Shomer Yavam continues even after the death of the father. Atir Tzarishin Sover Sha'af HaMisa Mafkias Azika Shuv Ein Li also Mishum Skugas Aviv Al Keni Efshal Lahamin Bekach Esakosu. This is the main punchline. She'ena misa mafkias hazika. V'ach liachar misosa adayini asura ala ben. Now, what does this mean? Ena misa mafkias hazika. Oh, I understand. No, it's just. Right, because it's no different. If the only trouble is there another brother? If there's no other brother, I mean, there's only a Zika here to Reuven because Shimon died without children, leaving an Almana who's Yevamot to Reuven. Now Ruvain dies. If Ruvain dies, then the Zika should be totally gone, unless he's talking about a case where it's a third brother. That I'm not sure. But he writes, Hatiritz Hasheni Sover She'ena Misa Mafkiras HaZika. How could that be? I mean,
can't marry your mother's.
can't matter what?
You can't marry your mother.
Right, but that's not because of Zika. That's because of an error. She's an error to you. But here we're talking about an Isur Shomeres Yavam, which is a result of Zika. But the Zika is gone. He's saying, no, the Zika is not gone. She still is the Kukal Yavam. I mean, how could that be possible if he's dead already? So again, Mitch, you're right. I mean, we could have said that maybe the Isa Leachar Misa is because she's like his father's wife. But that's not what he says. He says, Eina Misa Mafkis Hazika. I don't know what those words mean. That's like Chinese to me. Okay, Rav Osai said this is where we're going to stop for today. And again, as I said at the beginning of this year, we're going to use the next day or so to catch up to the Gemara on Daf Hey. So we'll start tomorrow on Daf Dalet Beis, and we're going to learn a lot about Shatnez and Kalayim and so forth and so on. And we're going to still continue with the sugi of Smichus and Darshaning Smichus or Ein Darshaning Smichus. We'll make a note that we got up to the Gabe Tzitzis.